Was it very challenging? And to how many investors did you talk to close the round?
To be honest, I did not talk to that many investors because everything went pretty fast at one point.
That's great to hear. Nice.
Because we once we showed this commercial traction, it became an interesting case to the investors, and especially also the software approach is pretty interesting.
Sequence start. All right, liftoff, and the clock is started. We have a liftoff.
Hello and welcome to the NewSpaceVision podcast, where we discuss rising technologies, economic opportunities, and social dreams centered around the topics of innovation and new space with executives, founders, and other exciting people from the startup and new space ecosystem. I'm Sven Pchivara.
And I'm Daniel Seidel, and we are the founders of the Berlin-based startup LiveView. Today, we are very excited to welcome Kristina Nikolaus, co-founder and CEO of OKAPI Orbit, which specializes in helping satellites avoid collisions and minimizing space debris. There is a weird connection between us. So I think the first time we met was at an office opening of the startup Blick, which just raised 12 million. And basically, Sven and I introduced one of our investors to Blick, who invested into Blick. And later, the same investor, Andreas Kupke, also invested into you. So that's like an interesting connection. And on the other side, you pitched to a potential new investor in exactly this room where we are right now in the LiveView office. Did they invest?
Yes, they invest.
They invested? Nice. So we would like to understand your personal story, and we would like to get an understanding. What brought you into the space industry?
So I came to the space industry more by chance than by planning it from long term ahead. So I think when I was a kid, that was my only touch points to space when I watched with my grandfather's Star Trek videos. And that's it. And I never believed that space is something where you can work as a normal person. But later on at the university in Braunschweig, I met my co-founders who went into this really crazy topic of space debris and started OKAPI Orbits with them.
That's exciting. I mean, I'm also a big Trekkie, and it's actually part of our investors' pitch, right? Always in the beginning that I'm a Trekkie. No, I think this is really a big part of the game, right?
But it's not the only coincidence and not the only parallel between you two. Daniel worked in the automotive industry. You worked in the automotive industry. So, what are the parallels between the automotive industry and space?
I think as nearly all of the industries and people on Earth, their connections to space in general, especially if you're looking to autonomous driving, for example, or the technologies which are in the car right now. And I think for me, where's the strongest similarity is that in the automotive industry, as well as in the space industry, you have products which you can get passionate about. So if you drive a nice car, and see this car and it's a tangible product, you can fall in love with it quite easily, as well as if you're working in a space company and see the satellites or go to fairs where you see rockets and all this interesting stuff.
Yeah. And what did you do in the automotive industry?
At this time, I was a trainee at Mercedes-Benz and went to different departments. This reached from financing to the production line, where you really see how the motor comes into the car and the buses. So it was quite diverse.
Nice.
And I can imagine, because I was in the same situation at BMW, not in a trainee position, but it is a big decision, actually, to leave such a good position at Mercedes.
Especially in Germany, right, where the automotive industry plays such an important role.
So, yeah, how was it for you? Was it a simple decision to leave this great opportunity at one of the most famous companies out there?
No, to be honest, I was struggling a long time because I really liked this corporate environment and I loved the automotive industry. But I decided for myself that I want to take the opportunity to see something else, because at that time I was 20 years old, so pretty young, and I couldn't imagine myself being this corporate for forever. So I thought, okay, I want to test what's out there for me, what else there beside the automotive industry.
Yeah, and was also a new space playing a role for you? Because maybe to give some background, for me personally, Of course, you could have worked for the European Space Agency or for the German Aerospace Center or Airbus, these big organizations. But I was working then in the automotive industry because you have the shorter product cycles and also what you mentioned. But for me personally, it was a change when NewSpace came, when I heard of Elon Musk or SpaceX, but also Planet, to go into this new opportunity. Was it somehow similar for you, or was it a different thing?
I think with NewSpace and space being more public and reachable in the media, it seemed to be that the space industry itself, that there is a business case and it's open for also not only the astronauts to go to space, so also for people who studied management as I did. So I think this opened my perspective that there's could be a job opportunity in the future.
Nice. Well, okay, so this is super exciting and super interesting, but obviously we are super curious to learn, like, what is the product of OKAPI Orbits? What are you building?
Yeah, so we at OKAPI Orbits, we're building a space traffic management software platform, which helps basically all people who are operating in space. This might be satellite operators or launcher operators to efficiently operate their missions and plan them with a zero impact on the space debris environment.
Okay, so a navigation system for in-orbit missions, right? Okay, maybe we're gonna unbundle this now in a second. And obviously, just to quote NASA here, even tiny paint flecks can damage a spacecraft when traveling at up to 28,000 kilometers an hour. That's the speed an object has in low Earth orbit. In fact, millimeter-sized orbital debris represents the highest mission-ending risk to most robotic spacecraft operating in low Earth orbit. Well, that's a long sentence, but in long story short, well, tracking the tens of thousands, if not more, of small particles in orbit and navigating around them, that's the challenge for every operator of a spacecraft in space, right? So let's imagine Daniel and I have built a satellite and we want to monitor the Earth. How are you helping us precisely? Like, how am I engaging? How could I use your software?
Yeah, I think you're touch basing an interesting point. So what we can do so far is a kind of a basketball size objects in LEO. They're catalogable. So this means the orbit is very well known. We can predict maneuvers ahead and know how to avoid these very precisely. Coming down to softball size objects, these are trackable, which means that we usually spot them and can also usually avoid collisions. But if you're talking about tiny paint flecks, they're usually damaging the surface of space-based assets. And these really tiny objects are really hard to tackle or really hard to detect. And we at OKAPI look through all the object size, predict how they are moving in comparison to your satellite, and find the best way and the optimized maneuvers to fulfill your mission goals. And then, of course, we have additional services like re-entry predictions. How do you plan the end of life of your mission? And also in initial mission planning. So we say, okay, this is the optimal setup of your overall mission over a lifetime of 5, 6, 7 years. And this is all part of the software platform.
I remember the party at Blick where we met the first time, and I talked to your colleagues because I also did orbit analytics and atmospheric effects, etc. And I was really excited about this topic because this is really, really rocket science, right? This is orbits, a lot of complex optimization problems you have to solve. So one question I had is, where do you get the data from?
So we at OKAPI, we use open source data. This is one part, but we also have a partner network of laser ranging stations, telescopes, and radar stations where we have on-demand tracking of specific objects which are relevant to our customers. And these are our main data sources. And then we also have the customer data, so we know very precisely what the people who sign up for our platform do, how they plan their missions. And that's also an integral part of the platform. Yeah. And
I mean, these radar stations are super exciting, and they're getting better and better. Can you tell us a bit, like, are there big stations planned for the next 10 years that your data is getting better, or will you in the future focus on relying on this open data with just adding a bit commercial?
So we see that the market, especially the commercial market of observations, is evolving a lot in the last years. And we see more and more commercial players entering the market, as well as states building new stations and opening them to the public. So we see definitely that more data will be available in the future. And we want to build a software which can leverage them to the most.
And is it, if you find smaller objects, will the amount of objects also increase, and at the end you will have way more maneuvers, which are the blind spots today, or how is it behaving?
So we see that the potential collisions with bigger objects are the ones where customers really have to maneuver. For smaller objects, what we also see that sometimes shielding technologies on the hardware itself are, from an economical perspective, more favorable for the customers. So I think there might be slight increase of the overall maneuvers, but not in significant amount.
Yeah, I would have a question. Like, let's take the example of that. There's a basketball-sized object in the same orbit or on a collision path to our satellites or live view satellite, and we say, okay, well, the risk is too high. We want to move the satellite. Obviously, we can't most probably operate this. That's correct. We can't operate most probably the satellite while it's being maneuvered from one orbit to the other. Or?
So it really depends, but most of the time you can't use it for your specific use case. Yeah. And it's on us to see, okay, which other satellite can take this responsibility over, or how can you leverage redundancy or reduce the downtime of your services with, for example, proactive maneuvers. So we take the mission constraints into account.
Well, that's very cool. Let's maybe touch on this in a second. My question was going into the direction, okay, we have our satellites. How does the information from OKAPI orbits get to our satellites to be moved upwards or downwards? Like what's the interface between your software and the satellite on orbit hardware?
So it's like an operational tool for the satellite operator on ground. So we have APIs as well as a web interface. So your operator would type in your satellite data to our platform and then receive the maneuver commands and then upload it to a communication system, for example, to their satellite or through their own operations software they have in-house.
So the operation software would still be operated, or it's the operation software of the satellite operator, right? So you don't go that deep today.
Yes,
right?
At the moment, yes.
Yeah. And do you have implicit knowledge about, for example, the thrusters of specific satellites? Like, do the operators need to put it into your software, or do you just give the delta V or something like this?
No, this is an integral part of the data our customers put into our platform. So we know very precisely the capabilities of their thrusters. We even help them to choose the right thruster for their mission goals and say, okay, this is the best thruster for your satellite. You should use this because with this you can increase the performance or perform the maneuver you will need in the future. So we have very explicit knowledge about this thruster and the hardware itself.
And this is also part of the business model for you, also to support them, right? So they save money, and basically, so that's how you sell it. But what is the business case there? How is the pricing working for such a product? Because I mean, Sven and I even just selling to companies, utilities, energy operators, where you have some benchmarks, problems on Earth of maintenance and orbit. It's all very challenging, I would say, regarding the pricing, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, so in general, we have a software as a service model. So you pay per satellite per month, basically, and get full access to the software services. And what we can do, we can show our customers very precisely how much money they will save with less maneuvers, and also how much more revenue they will generate with an extended lifetime of their satellites. So we say, okay, look, if you have less maneuvers, you can use this trust to operate your satellite for X amount longer. And then it becomes a really easy business case for the customer to evaluate.
And what's typically the increase of lifetime, or how much money can they save with using OKAPI? What is in your sales material?
It's very different from satellite operator to operator. So this can be several weeks up to several months, which they can extend the lifetime. And compared to an overall lifetime of 3 to 8 years, that's quite a lot.
Yeah. Maybe just one question before we maybe also dive a little bit more into the overall regulatory framework. So it seems like you have a lot of, I would say, modules of your software. You've touched on, okay, mission planning. You said mission operations, and then also end of lifetime. Like, can you maybe give us an overview of what like the tool landscape is within OKAPI orbits? Like, it seems like you're really covering the life cycle of a satellite, right?
Yeah. So typically we engage with our customers very early on when they just have 1 or 2 satellites maximum in orbit and plan their constellations or bigger fleets of satellites. And there we help them to plan the mission. This includes what hardware is the best, what orbits are the most interesting one, and how can they reach their goals? What operation system do they have? Should they build to operate most efficiently? And then we come over to the risk prediction part where we say, okay, we screen everything what's around your satellites. We know who is next to you today and in 5 years, who are your neighbors basically. And then we get over to the maneuver part. We say, okay, this is the best maneuver to fulfill your goals, to reduce the risk. And then we also plan the re-entry phase and the deorbiting for them. So say, okay, it's basically the full life cycle once you plan to have satellites until your satellite re-enters Earth orbit.
Yeah, just another question came to my mind. Is it so? I was under the impression you're focusing on low Earth orbit. Now we hit the James Webb Telescope. I mean, that's very far away at the branch point. But are you focusing on LEO?
So our customer base is mostly in LEO at the moment, but we also have first GEO operators who are in the platform because space debris is not that of a big issue for GEO operators and for LEO operators, but they face similar, they face problems which can be solved with our solutions. So we're also looking to GEO.
So am I the first one who asked this James Webb Telescope question? Because I mean, it's super sad, like the most expensive experiment, and there was already a small collision. And I had fear of another collision with the James Webb, and it's damaged, right? It was just so short.
Yeah, maybe talking about exactly these, in part catastrophic consequences of a collision. And you also mentioned, well, who gonna be your neighbors in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years, right? We all are, obviously we as consumers of satellite data very much benefit from the increase in number of satellites, but with the number of satellites in orbit, most probably there will be an increase of debris in orbit. Is there any kind of regulation towards minimizing the amount of space debris at the moment?
So we see that national states are implementing regulatories and laws. We don't have an international approach yet, but we also see that agencies or organizations like the United Nations or IADC or ESA implementing best practices or guidelines. So we see a movement there, but we're not there where we should be to really make orbit safe for everyone.
So how would you define, so where should we be, basically?
We should have an international approach how we behave in space, which is bounding for all operators and securing a minimal amount of sustainable behavior without compromising the competitiveness of certain countries or operators. So I think this is the place where we should be. And
part of it would also be penalties for misbehavior, right? So are there today already some penalties from these national regulatories?
I don't know the exact if someone has it, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, there was the case where there were some experiments with rockets to satellites, and then you had a lot of space debris, right? And I think it's very hard to then put a penalty on China,
to enforce it exactly on an overall level. But maybe one question, like maybe because like all of these ground to satellite tests were military driven, right? And we also have like a lot of commercial activity going on, which maybe is easier to regulate. We all know the great impact SpaceX has on both launcher systems as well as now the operator of the biggest satellite constellation in space. And what I just know anecdotally is that the Aeolus satellite, I think, from the European Space Agency had to move out of the way for SpaceX Starlink satellite. Have you already talked to SpaceX for using your solution? We can't comment on this.
We can't comment on this. Yeah. But the funny thing about this Aeolus satellite was that they tried to reach SpaceX and they didn't react.
Yeah, exactly. That was exactly. I forgot about that one. Yeah, that makes the whole story even more
And such a beautiful satellite. Yeah.
Exactly.
So what's also interesting for us is to understand if there is already awareness for space debris and the commercial implications at your potential customers. Like, do they really think of this as a real problem, or is it just, we will wait until something happens and then we react?
I think with the increasingly launched satellites, everyone sees that there's a problem and it's quite popular. Every space fair has a space debris session, basically. So I think it's in their minds, definitely. But there are also some players who say, okay, look, I can launch another satellite if one breaks down, and they don't see this impact on the society.
Well, one question I would have, not so much about like the people sending stuff up into space, but rather the ones which are competing with you to help others deal with that problem, right? Which is that right there are companies like Kaihan and Leo Labs, for example, even captures its own data. How do you differentiate to them? And to touch on Leo Labs, do you plan to vertically integrate and build up your own radar stations at some point? As you've said, you are working right now with a lot of partners.
So I think it's very compatible on one hand. Of course, we're using a lot of data and have a software solution which is really good in fusing different data sets to get a holistic overview and works on a broader scheme, let's say. So I think there are definitely compatibilities from companies who have their own observations and ours.
I've seen an interesting presentation which made me very skeptical, but I'm not the expert on this. It was a company which said observations from ground are nice, but we put a lot of satellites into orbit and actually find the things with optical cameras on satellites. I have to say what made me thought of the feasibility is that the people behind this company were very skilled astrophysicists, etc. And so, but what do you think about this approach? Because I thought commercially very challenging.
Yes, I think from engineering perspective, this is definitely an interesting approach because, of course, you can, if you have equipment in space which can track smaller objects, that's nice to have. But it's also a very, very challenging task from my point of view because the space debris is not a fixed point, so you have to detect this, but your satellite is also moving and you don't know 100% where the position of your satellite is. So from a physical perspective, this is a really hard challenge. And talking about the commercial perspective, if you think about this as the overall business model, of course, the customers have to pay for this infrastructure, and everyone knows how much space infrastructure costs to maintain it and to launch it. It really depends if the customers are willing to pay this extra cost in the long term to have a slightly better database.
Yeah, this was exactly my thought, that from an investor's perspective or generally commercial perspective, I calculated the number of how many satellites would you need, how much would the launches, the development, operations, and so on cost. That was a lot of money, definitely. So if there is a company who is doing this, we are looking forward to your pitch, and I would like to ask some questions regarding this.
Exactly.
It's there was maybe the business perspective missing on this idea, because technically, as you mentioned, really exciting. So you definitely see the future on more ground-based systems, right?
Yeah. Well, maybe a controversial question. In the end, like, as it is such an important topic to manage space traffic, right? And here on Earth, we have also the airspace, space on water, where aircraft are being managed by governmental institutions like air traffic control. Will we ultimately see a centralized space traffic control who will take over some of the things you're currently providing?
I think some parts should be taken over by the government, especially when it comes to regulatory and setting a common understanding internationally. How do we want to use space? I think this is definitely a governmental task. But I think the technical solution will come from the industry, because the industry is way faster to develop solutions which can help. And we're already there where the government is not is still planning on how they want to approach this. So I will think it will be a industry pushed development.
So it's more like the government is setting the frameworks, like how you should behave in traffic, and it's maybe setting out the lanes in which you should drive. In the end, you would have still a navigation system not built by the government. So just like here on Earth.
Yeah.
Cool.
I would have a product question, which I just got aware of because you mentioned the government. Like when I read your name, you could also say OKAPI, API,
Yes.
right? And my question would be from a product perspective. When I first got to know you, the API integrations into the systems, super exciting topic from the software perspective. But are customers now more using end user application with the front end from OKAPI, or are they really relying on the API?
They're using the API. It's fully integrated into their systems because the goal is to automate this whole process of maneuvering. And we in our case use the graphical user interface just for sales purposes and for the first 2 weeks if you want to see what's happening and have it visualized and gain the trust into this product. Then we use it, but then it kind of vanishes from the desk.
Yeah, that's super cool. So really nice and also scalable business model. And this automation is definitely a super cool thing. So let's talk a bit more about your company because we know you mentioned you originated from Braunschweig, from the university, and I also know that your co-founders, they worked also in an institute on this technology. Can you tell us a bit more about this story from university to startup, also from a technology perspective?
Yes, sure. So we're a classical spin-off from the Technical University of Braunschweig, where my 3 co-founders were PhD students at that time, everyone with their own focus, from long-term simulation of space debris environment until data fusion of observation data. So we at the beginning had a wide range of knowledge about the space debris environment. And then, we saw NewSpace is coming, and we thought, okay, there will be an opportunity for all the things we developed for years, which would, vanish in the university if we don't take the chance to commercialize and bring it out there. And when we started with OKAPI, everyone said, okay, space debris, what a crazy topic. No one was talking about this 2018. So we had a quite rough time when we started. And then it took us a couple of beers and bars until we figured out the business model and how we want to approach this and started.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a niche also from an educational perspective. In Germany, there are 7 universities teaching space engineering. And then you have these 3 PhDs doing these simulations for space debris and want to start a company. Like this IP or this knowledge they had from the university, was there also some IP transfer from the university? Was there a smooth process, or was it more that you got the theoretical knowledge, but you actually built it from scratch?
And maybe just to add on this, the reason why we're asking is because oftentimes, at least here in the German kind of universal system, it's quite hard for everyone who's listening to exactly transfer IP from the university to startups. So this is, I think, something which could be done better in Germany. But have you faced these challenges as well?
To be honest, not to that extent as most of the startups did, because we built the product later on, so it was a theoretical knowledge, and then we start to build the product from scratch, basically during the Exist Gründerstipendium, so a governmental grant. And we had a professor and an institute which was very supportive in commercializing it, which is also commercially focused with a lot of industry projects. So they saw the benefits we're bringing with commercializing this. So they support us along the road. So the professor and the people at the institute.
Yeah, that's also always what Sven and I tell to people who want to start a company. I mean, everyone is talking about the better funding in the US, but for this early stage grants, Germany and Europe is a great place, right? Sven and I also had this Exist scholarship, but I know there's space for 3 people and you are 4. So how did you manage that one?
We still had someone at the university at that time, so we had an overlap until we had the first own generated revenues to employ everyone at OKAPI.
Nice. Who was the first customer? If you can disclose, You can't.
Okay. So, we can. We started off with ESA projects, so this was the first revenues we generated, Yeah. So ESA was the first anchor customer.
But then maybe like let's touch on this. So how have you financed the company? What has been the financial history? Because like just like to already pinpoint to one of the highlights, you just closed your seed round, I think, and quite a big one, 5.5 million euros, if I'm correct. But this has been the latest news. So, and you said you started with a scholarship. How have you financed yourself in between?
Yeah, so due to our good relationship with the institute, we had ESA project very early on. So we generated our own projects. We're bootstrapping for nearly 2 years. Then we closed an angel round where we had convertible loans with renowned angels from different industries. And yeah, that's it. And then with the angels, we made the step to get the first paying customers for our services, proving that there's a scalable business in what we're delivering. And then we had an easier access also to convince the VCs who now joined the round.
Yeah, I think some of the angels which invested in your company are also coming from the space background,
yes.
right?
Yes,
yeah.
Definitely.
And do you see now talking to more investors, because it's a very abstract and challenging topic to understand, right? And now you actually got some interesting VCs in the round, right? For example, Munich RE Ventures. So was it easy to pitch the case to them, or was it very challenging? And to how many investors did you talk to close the round?
To be honest, I did not talk to that many investors because everything went pretty fast at one point.
That's great to hear. Nice.
Because we once we showed this commercial traction, it became an interesting case to the investors, and especially also the software approach is pretty interesting, as you might know. And I think what helped us is that the space hypothesis was proven by other startups before. So we're kind of down in the supply chain, but we've seen big fundraisers also in Europe for space companies. So we talked to VCs who are open for space, who are interested in this, and then where we had basic knowledge already.
And it was in June where it was announced, right? So I think you closed a bit before, and that's exactly the time now where we have a financial cool down and the VC funding went down. And then there's this niche space tech startup raising this round. So this then had an influence on you because the investors, you found a lead investor and then it went fast? Or did you see in early discussions some implications?
Yeah, so our round was closed earlier than the announcement. So for us, we were not affected by this downturn or cool down, as you said.
But I think like the lead VC of your last round is very interesting. It's Munich RE Ventures. For all the people who don't know who Munich RE is, it's the biggest reinsurance company globally. And they have a US-based venture capital arm, which led the round. So first of all, congrats. It's really cool. Maybe, I don't know whether it is publicly shared and if you can touch on this, but I mean, Munich RE has also made some other investment, and they, I think, also the biggest insurer of rocket launches. So I already can see the connection there. But can you tell us a little bit why they've invested in you?
Yeah, so first of all, Munich Re Ventures, they're really progressive and understanding what's coming next. So they're investing mainly in disruptive technologies and industries who have really impact on society and the future. And as you mentioned, they are the biggest space insurer, not only for rocket launchers, but also for satellite operators. So they know the space industry already, and they also know about the risks. So they see what problem we're solving and are very aware of this. So we had a very good touch point from the start with them.
Great.
So is this another potential for customers, the insurance companies?
Yes, sure. So what we do is a technical risk mitigation tool, if you want to put it like that. And there's a natural connection to insurance business where they have a financial risk mitigation tool. So there are definitely business opportunities there.
Yes. Yeah, it's great to hear. Just like one story regarding Munich RE. When I was in school, I was super fascinated with space, and I wanted to get a summer internship at a space company or something related to that. And what I did, I called Munich RE's phone number hotline, and I tried to get through to the people who are insuring rockets, and they just pick up the phone and I introduced myself like 14, 15-year-old boy, and then just hung up. But I think now, yeah, well, but I think like this just like back then. That's now
they missed a big opportunity.
Opportunity, I would say. No, but it's really great, and congrats again. We know how hard it is to raise a round, and as said, I think the time is really, really great.
Yeah. You also have mentioned the business angels coming from a space background. Right, one person is Andreas Kupke, founder of a fintech, who will be at our next NewSpaceVision meetup. Basically, what is the role of these business angels? Like, do they support you a lot because they have these connections to the space ecosystem, or where does the support come from?
Yeah, definitely. So the angels are very active in helping us to think about new business opportunities, to getting us in touch with other players in the industry. So they're very, very helpful and hands-on in the daily operations as well.
Yeah, what we also see, if you have business angels at an early stage, we actually didn't do it, but we always think when going back, we should have had business angels sooner because they just give you so much support. Also as a founder, right? So this networking is a super important topic. Also, I mean, we have a relationship with you and there's also a network, but you are a female founder, which we don't see so often, unfortunately. And you also in the Women in Aerospace group since 2018, right? So that's super cool. Can you tell us a bit more, first of all, about this group before we may dive a bit into this topic?
Yes, sure. So the Women in Aerospace group is an international group which helps to build networks, especially within the female aerospace professionals network, and also who supports young persons who want to get into the space industry. So it's a broad scheme what they're offering, and yeah.
And how can I, as an interested person in aerospace, join this group?
So they're local groups, and you can find them all online and just fill out a short form, and then you're free to go to the networking events to enjoy the
networking
talks
and
networking. Yeah.
Yeah, there was one interesting thing. I looked into some stats, and I was surprised that in the space ecosystem there is a better gender balance than in some pure IT software industries. Do you see the same, or how do you see the gender balance in the space industry right now?
So I think the gender balance is improving, but really slowly improving. So there's a lot imbalance still there, and I think this is not an issue of fixing the women and say, okay, let's go and be just more curious and get in the space industry. It's more of an topic of company culture and culture itself to be open and make everyone feel comfortable and valued. So yeah.
So how do you do it at OKAPI? Do you have some activities or how do you manage it?
To be honest, at this stage, we don't have specific activities to bring in diverse people, except building the company culture where everyone feels comfortable. And soon we have over 40%, which are female employees at OKAPI with 11 nationalities, not because we said, okay, we want to bring in more women and more diverse people, just because we said, okay, we're open to everyone and see who's best for the job. And we got brilliant applications and also encourage the women which are in the company to go out and be
This is a really high number, 40%. I'm super happy to hear this. And I think you also, as a role model, play a role here. Because what we have seen internally, so LiveView has also a bit more than 30%, which for software is also more than average. Of course, it should always improve. But what we have seen as one of the biggest impact is if you have the first female developers in a team, they're also part of the interviewing process. You just attract also more female talents in the future, right? So because if the interviewing process is only done, for example, by male, right, then you won't find the people right at the end, right? Yeah. So it's somehow a filter, and you as an organization need to de-bias yourself, I think, a lot, right? And role models are always the best approach here, I think.
Yeah. As we come to the end of the podcast, maybe a question like, what would be in a word of advice to anyone who wants to start in a new space ecosystem as a founder, as a co-founder, or in another company? Do you have any advice?
Yes, if you want to reach out to these rocket insurers, call them twice if they hang up.
Maybe I should have done that. Maybe I would be now working at an insurance company or would have started a space company earlier. Well, is there anything which you would like to say to our audience? Is there are there any news about OKAPI space which you would like to share? Any open positions which you would like to fill? Now's the time for that.
If you join us on our journey, check out our jobs.
Very good.
Thanks a lot, Kristina. And thanks for having you in person here in the office in Berlin. It was really nice to talk to you. And maybe we see you at the next NewSpaceVision meetup, because you were also pitching at a NewSpaceVision meetup when you were a handful of people.
Yes.
Exactly. And for everyone listening, please make sure to tune in next time when we have a chat with Mark Kugel, founder of microgravity research company URI. Exactly, that's going to be exciting as well.
I'm really looking forward to that. That's a super, super exciting, crazy topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And please make sure that you follow us on NewSpaceVision at NewSpaceVision on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and very new on TikTok as well, where we hope to post short highlights of this podcast and all podcasts in the future. See you next time, I would say.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
All right, liftoff, and the clock is started. Listen, the Eagle has landed.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.